The abandoned kitchen door jumped against its iron bolt as the earth struck the estate from below. Martha Quinn caught the table before it overturned, then heard the colliery bell begin its wild, uneven hammering. 40 miners were still beneath the eastern field. One of them had left his untouched supper token in her ledger, certain he would collect it after the night shift. Dust sifted from the rafters. Beyond the locked door, boots pounded across the yard, and men shouted that number 2 gallery had folded in. Superintendent Silas Vane's voice rose above them, ordering the cage sealed and every ventilation report removed from the office. He was not trying to save the trapped men first. He was trying to save himself. And Martha knew exactly which missing report could prove it. She drove her shoulder into the door once, twice, but the bolt held from the outside. Vane had locked her there before dawn for accusing him of falsifying air readings. On the table lay the tools of her punishment: old meal books, cracked pans, and the estate's discarded kitchen accounts. Then the chimney coughed a hard breath of coal dust into the room. Martha froze. The draft had reversed. Somewhere under the estate, air was still moving. A fist struck the door. "Miss Quinn," a young hauling clerk cried through the boards. "They say all 40 are gone." "They are not gone until the air is gone," Martha answered. She dragged a chair beneath the chimney throat and held a strip of flour sack near the opening. The cloth pulled inward, released, then pulled again in a steady pulse. A buried passage was breathing through the old kitchen flue. Most people would have seen soot and ruin. Martha saw direction. Listen closely, because the woman shut inside that forgotten room was no rescue engineer. She had never commanded a digging crew or calculated the weight of a collapsed roof. But for 7 years she had balanced lamp oil against shift lengths, meal counts against underground crews, and drainage charges against every tunnel marked in the colliery books. Men lied. Numbers usually lied only when someone forced them. "Find Mr. Ashcombe," she called through the door. "Tell him the kitchen chimney is drawing from below." The clerk hesitated. Everyone on the estate knew Edmund Ashcombe had buried a brother after the last mine accident and had not entered a shaft since. He owned the colliery, but grief had made him trust Vane with every decision that carried the smell of coal. Another shock rolled beneath the floor. A shelf collapsed, spilling jars across the stones. Martha dropped beside the oldest kitchen ledger and found what she needed: a drainage payment made 12 years earlier for clearing an abandoned service cut between the kitchen foundations and number 2 gallery. The work had been charged, signed, and then crossed from every later map. She tore out the page, though destroying an estate ledger could send her to prison, and pushed it beneath the door. 40 names are written in my shift book," she said. "I will not let Superintendent Vane turn them into 40 graves because he is afraid of one page." The yard went suddenly quiet. Then a different set of footsteps approached, slow, measured, and heavy with authority. The bolts scraped back. Edmund Ashcombe stood in the doorway, pale beneath the coal dust, with Vane just behind him. Vane's hand was already reaching for the page. And from deep inside the chimney came 3 faint knocks. Edmund Ashcombe caught Superintendent Vane's wrist before his fingers closed around the torn ledger page. "Leave it." The word was quiet, but every man in the yard heard it. Vane slowly withdrew his hand. "Sir, that woman has already interfered with official records. Those sounds could be settling stone. Nothing more." 3 knocks came again through the chimney. Then 2. Then 3. Martha looked at Edmund. "That is no settling roof." The mine owner stepped into the abandoned kitchen for the first time in years. Coal dust lay across the counters, and rainwater had stained the plaster above the old ovens. Until that morning, he had treated the room as a place for broken equipment and unwanted servants. Now the estate seemed to be listening through its walls. "Can the men reach this chimney?" he asked. "Not the chimney itself, but perhaps the old service cut beneath it." "Perhaps. I keep books, Mr. Ashcombe. I do not dig tunnels." Vane gave a hard breath. Then let men who understand mines handle this. Martha turned on him. The men who understood the mine gave you 7 ventilation warnings. Silence tightened across the room. Edmund looked from her to Vane. Is that true? The reports were preliminary. They carried the signatures of 2 deputies and the night examiner, Martha said. Each warned that number 2 gallery was losing clean airflow. Each disappeared from the monthly packet before it reached this house. Vane's face remained calm. She is a clerk who resents authority. Martha did not raise her voice. 40 men are breathing whatever air remains below us. You may settle your opinion of me after they are above ground. Another tremor passed through the kitchen floor. This time the chimney pulled harder. Loose soot rose from the hearth instead of falling into it. Martha climbed onto the stone ledge and held the flour cloth near the flue. The strips stretched inward. Open both ovens, she said. No one moved. Now. The hauling clerk obeyed first. 2 laborers followed, dragging aside rusted grates and sweeping years of ash from the channels beneath them. The old kitchen had once fed harvest crews and winter tenants. Its paired ovens shared a broad underground draft system, wider than any household chimney required. Martha spread the drainage ledger on the table. Beside it, she placed the current shift book and began reading names. 40 entries. 40 lamp charges. 40 meal deductions. 40 men confirmed underground when the roof fell. Edmund stood behind her as she matched the night roster to the gallery assignments. His gaze stopped at one surname. Ashcombe. Martha saw his hand close against the table. Your cousin Daniel took the inspection shift, she said. He was meant to remain above. He traded places with a sick deputy. For one instant, Edmund looked less like the master of an estate than a man hearing the earth close over the last member of his family he still knew how to love. Vane stepped nearer. All the more reason to begin at the main shaft. We clear the fall, lower a rescue party, and proceed by standard practice. How long? Edmund asked. With enough men, perhaps 20 hours. Martha shook her head. The last air reading in number 2 allowed less than half that. Vane's eyes sharpened. You cannot know that. I copied the report before you burned it. She reached inside her dress and drew out a folded sheet, darkened at the edges from being carried close against her body. It showed dates, lamp flame measurements, complaints of headaches, and a steady decline in ventilation over 6 shifts. Edmund read it once, then again. At the bottom stood Vane's initials beside the words. Corrective work deferred until after quarterly production target. The mine owner lowered the page. You saw this? Vane did not answer immediately. His gaze went to the open door, where workers crowded the yard. At every colliery, he said at last, there are conditions less than ideal. Closing a gallery each time a clerk grows frightened would ruin the estate. Martha's thin hands flattened over the shift book. The estate may be ruined before sunrise if those men die. Edmund folded the copied report and placed it in his coat. You will leave this kitchen, he told Vane. Sir. You will remain in the office under guard until I decide what must be done. Vane's expression changed by only a fraction. If you listen to her, you will send more men to their deaths. If I continue listening to you, Edmund replied, I may leave 40 where they lie. 2 workers escorted the superintendent across the yard. Vane went without struggling, but as he passed Martha, he spoke low enough that only she heard. When that passage kills them, every widow on this estate will know whose guess buried the rescuers. Martha watched him go. The threat landed because part of her already feared the same thing. Edmund ordered the kitchen cleared of broken furniture. Within minutes, the room changed. The long table became a map station. The cooling shelf held lamps and medical cloth. The old bread racks were filled with picks, rope, water tins, and numbered meal packets for the rescue crews. Martha assigned no digging orders. She asked questions. Which pumps had run during the night? which drainage channels had backed up, which crews reported smoke moving against the expected current, which miners had collected extra lamp oil. The answers came unevenly, each man speaking from memory while she checked him against the books. A pump tender named Harlan remembered water surging through a disused pipe beneath the kitchen yard shortly after the collapse. Another worker had seen dust blow from an iron vent behind the old scullery. The shift record showed that 6 miners had been repairing rails near the eastern crosscut, while the remaining 34 had been sent deeper into number 2. The 40 were not necessarily together. That truth struck the room harder than the collapse. If they are divided, Edmund said, the knocks may come from only one group. Martha marked both positions on the drainage map. Then we need to know which group found the old cut. She ordered everyone silent. The kitchen stilled. Even the horses beyond the yard seemed far away. Martha took the iron poker and struck the chimney wall 3 times. She waited. Nothing came. She struck twice. A faint answer rose from below. 2 knocks. A worker crossed himself. Martha tried 3 again. 3 returned. They hear us, Edmund whispered. They hear the vibration, she said. That does not tell us how many. She began a simple code. 1 knock for yes, 2 for no, 3 to repeat the question. Are more than 10 men with you? 1 knock. More than 20? 1. More than 30? A pause. Then 1 knock. 30 or more were alive near the service cut. Martha closed her eyes for a single breath. At least 31. Perhaps all 40. But the code could not count precisely, and false hope would waste time as surely as panic. She asked whether the passage was blocked. 1 knock. Whether air was moving. 1 knock. Whether water was rising. Another pause. Then 1 hard knock. The drainage map showed an old brick culvert running from the kitchen cistern toward the eastern crosscut. It had been sealed after subsidence 12 years before, yet the estate had continued paying small maintenance charges for 3 years afterward. Martha traced the figures with her finger. These payments were not for clearing the passage, she said. They were for reinforcing it. Edmund leaned over the page. Then why was it removed from later maps? Because someone wanted its existence forgotten. They followed the ledger reference to a stack of kitchen maintenance books. Hours of damp had fused several pages together. Martha loosened them over a kettle, using steam from the old copper boiler. Beneath an entry for chimney repairs, she found a carpenter's note describing an iron inspection hatch under the scullery flagstones. Men lifted the stones. There it was. A square plate, rusted shut, with cold air whispering around its edges. Relief moved through the room, but Martha stopped the workers before they struck it open. Test the flame. A safety lamp was lowered near the crack. Its flame lengthened, then turned faintly blue. Gas. Not enough to extinguish the lamp, but enough to kill men or ignite beneath a careless lantern. Edmund looked at her. Can it be clear? Not by opening the hatch all at once. What do you need? Martha studied the ovens, chimney dampers, copper pipes, and the bellows once used to drive heat through the bread chambers. Fireless air, she said. In time. They sealed every open flame in the kitchen. Lamps were moved outside behind thick glass. Wet cloth was packed around the boiler mouths. The old bread oven bellows were joined to iron stovepipe sections and fixed over the hatch crack. Martha organized teams to pump fresh air downward in measured turns. 10 minutes at the bellows. 10 minutes carrying spoil. 10 minutes eating and drinking. No man worked until exhaustion made him careless. She recorded every rotation. The kitchen that had been her prison became a machine of breath, food, and memory. Near midday, Edmund found her standing alone by the table, gripping its edge until her knuckles blanched. You should eat, he said. So should they. They cannot eat what you refuse. She looked toward the packed meal sacks. Each bore a miner's name because Martha had prepared the deductions the evening before. Daniel Ashcombe's packet rested near the top. Edmund picked it up but did not open it. My brother died underground 6 years ago, he said. A roof fall in the western seam. I was the one who ordered the search stopped. Martha said nothing. They told me no one could have survived. I believed them because believing them ended the decision. And Daniel never forgave you? No, nor should he have. Martha finally took a piece of bread. Then do not end this decision early. The words might have sounded cruel from another person. From her, they were permission to remain useful. A shout rose from the hatch. The gas reading had fallen. Workers loosened the iron plate by inches. Cold, foul air poured upward, followed by muddy water. Beneath the hatch lay a brick shaft barely wide enough for one man at a time. A rescue captain lowered a weighted rope. It descended 30 feet before touching the sloping floor of the old service cut. "We can enter," he said. Martha checked the drainage marks and shook her head. "Not yet. The gallery water is feeding this passage. If the lower culvert gives way, it will fill faster than men can crawl out." The captain frowned. "Then what do you propose, Miss Quinn?" She placed the meal ledger beside the drainage map. The kitchen supplied underground maintenance crews through this hatch during winter closures. The meal counts tell us how many men the passage could carry safely. Never more than 6 at a time. The captain looked at Edmund. Edmund looked at Martha. 6, he said. No more. The first team tied guide ropes around their waists and entered without lamps, carrying only enclosed safety lights. Martha noted every name and every minute. Then she waited beside the chimney. For nearly an hour, no signal came. The yard grew restless. Men began whispering that Vane had been right, that the old passage had collapsed, that Martha had sent 6 rescuers into a grave beneath the very room where she had been locked. Edmund stood at the hatch, staring into blackness. At last the guide rope jerked. Once. Twice. Then went slack. Martha caught it in both hands. From beneath the floor came a man's muffled cry. "The water's broken through." Martha wrapped the guide rope around the table leg and ordered every idle hand to pull. Muddy water surged through the open hatch as the 6 rescuers came crawling backward from the service cut, coughing and dragging one injured man between them. The last rescuer emerged with blood on his temple and a broken section of brick in his fist. "The culvert wall gave way," he said. "Passage is filling from the north drain." Martha dropped beside the drainage map. The north drain should have emptied toward the river, not toward number 2 gallery. She followed its faded line until it met a later ink mark made in Superintendent Vane's hand. A valve had been reversed. "Close the Blackthorn sluice," she told the pump tender. Harlan stared at her. "That sends water through the estate mill race. It sends it away from the miners. The race crosses Mr. Ashcombe's lower fields. It could tear out the grain bridge." Edmund stood over the map. The bridge carried nearly every wagon between the colliery and the railway. Without it, the estate would lose months of shipments. "Close it," he said. Harlan ran. Martha turned to the injured rescuer. "How far did you reach?" 70 yards, maybe 80. We heard hammering beyond a fall, but the water came too fast." "Could you tell how many?" "No, ma'am." She checked the rope marks against the carpenter's note. The team had reached the first bend, where the old service cut narrowed before joining a ventilation drift. The buried miners were close enough to hear, but still separated by stone and water. Edmund ordered the rescue captain to prepare another team. Martha stopped him. "Not until the flow drops. We cannot leave them waiting. We cannot drown 6 more men because waiting feels like cowardice." The captain's jaw tightened, but Edmund raised one hand. "We follow her measurements." Martha hated the trust in that sentence almost as much as she needed it. Every decision now carried another man's life, and no column in any ledger could guarantee the roof would hold. Outside, workers rushed to the Blackthorn sluice. The old gate resisted until 3 men leaned against the wheel. When it finally turned, water roared through the mill race and struck the lower fields with enough force to uproot fence posts. The grain bridge shuddered, split at one support, and sagged into the flood. No one in the kitchen celebrated. They watched the hatch. The water slowed from a surge to a steady stream, then to a muddy trickle. Martha marked the time. "Give the culvert 15 minutes," she said. "Then send 3 men, not 6. 1 to test the roof, 1 to clear, 1 to carry the line." The rescue captain frowned. 3 will work slower. They will use less air and turn faster if the water rises again. He accepted the order. Before the next team entered, Martha tied small meal tins along the guide rope. Each held water, cloth, and a strip of paper wrapped in wax. On the paper she had written, "We hear you. Save your strength. Strike once every quarter hour." The tins disappeared beneath the kitchen floor. For the next 2 hours, the abandoned room kept its rhythm. Bellows pushed clean air downward. Workers rotated before fatigue weakened their hands. Women from the estate laundry boiled cloth and filled water vessels. Clerks copied shift assignments, while Martha checked every name against the 40 entries in her book. No one was allowed to say 39. No one was allowed to say most. Until a body was found or a man answered, the number remained 40. The first return signal came through the chimney shortly after noon. 1 knock. Then, after a pause, for groups of 10, Martha counted twice. "All 40 are together," she said. The kitchen released one trembling breath. Edmund gripped the back of a chair. "Can they reach the service cut?" The answer came after Martha struck the question through the chimney. 2 knocks. No. A collapse blocked the final junction. She asked whether anyone was badly injured. 1 knock. "How many?" Edmund asked. "The code cannot tell us cleanly." Martha changed the pattern, assigning single blows to numbers. The reply came unevenly, 5 knocks, a long pause, then 1 more. 6 injured. She asked whether any could not walk. 2 knocks. None were helpless yet. The distinction mattered. If the passage could be opened, the miners might crawl out under their own strength. If men had to be carried through the narrow service cut, the rescue would slow until the air failed. A commotion rose in the yard. Superintendent Vane entered between 2 workers, one hand gripping the arm of the clerk guarding him. He had not escaped. He had demanded to be heard, and enough frightened men still respected his title to bring him. "You are destroying the estate on the word of a bookkeeper," he told Edmund. "The bridge is gone. The lower fields are flooding. And now she sends untrained men into a gas passage." Martha did not look up from the map. The safety lamps show the gas falling. "Because the chimney is drawing it into this room. The bellows are moving clean air downward, or feeding fire beneath the gallery. There is no open flame in the passage." Vane stepped toward the table. "You cannot know what sparks the collapse produced." Martha finally faced him. "Then tell us why you reversed the north drain valve." The room went still. Vane's expression did not change. "I did no such thing." She turned the map, so everyone could see his initials beside the altered line. "You signed the drainage corrections 6 months ago. That mark approved an inspection. The invoice says the valve was changed." A clerk's description. "Your clerk." Vane looked toward the gathered workers, measuring which men still feared him. "The eastern galleries were flooding," he said. "The valve protected production. It pushed runoff toward the old service cut. A passage no longer in use. A passage you removed from the current maps." His voice hardened. "Because it was unsafe." "Then why did the estate keep buying timber braces for it?" Martha placed 3 maintenance accounts in a row. Each listed oak beams, iron straps, and underground labor. The expenses had been hidden under kitchen repairs, chimney work, and cellar drainage. Edmund read the figures. You maintained the passage. Vane said nothing. You knew it connected to number 2, Martha continued. You kept it open as an emergency air route, but removed it from the official plan so inspectors would not ask why the main ventilation was failing. One of the older miners stepped forward. We carried timber down there last winter. Vane told us it was for the pump chamber. Another man spoke from the doorway. I fitted iron bands around a brick arch under the scullery. Never knew what lay past it. The workers did not suddenly become brave. They watched Vane before each word, as though he might still cut their wages or dismiss them from the estate. But one statement made room for another. Harlan returned soaked from the mill race. The north valve had been chained in its reverse position. Chain was new. Vane turned to Edmund. You are letting panic become evidence. No, Martha said. The books are evidence. The altered map is evidence. The chain is evidence. The men who performed the work are witnesses. Vane's calm began to thin. And when the roof kills the rescue crew, will your accounts raise them from the dead? Martha stepped between him and the open hatch. No one enters this passage under your authority again. You have no authority here. Edmund moved beside her. She has mine. Vane stared at the mine owner. You will hand your colliery to a woman who has never worked a face. I am placing the rescue under the person who knew the danger before the roof fell. Martha pointed toward the yard. Take him back to the office. This time put 2 men at the door. Vane did not resist until he reached the threshold. Then he turned. There is another fall beyond the junction, he said. The rescue captain looked up. How would you know? Vane's silence answered before he did. Martha crossed the room. You have been inside the service cut. Years ago. How far? He looked at Edmund, perhaps hoping ownership would still protect him. How far? Edmund repeated. To the eastern rise. The captain spread the map. That puts him beyond the block junction. Vane's eyes moved toward the chimney. Martha understood. There is another entrance. No one spoke. She searched the old accounts again, this time not for drainage or timber, but for meals. During 3 winter closures, food had been charged to underground maintenance crews on days when the main cage did not run. The kitchen hatch accounted for some deliveries, but not all. 12 meals had been sent each day. The service cut safely held only 6 men. There were 2 crews, Martha said. One entered here. The other went through a second access point. She followed the meal deductions to cartage charges, then to lamp oil issued from a storage shed near the estate chapel. The amounts formed a route more clearly than any map. Edmund saw it with her. The old burial tunnel. The chapel stood on a rise above the eastern gallery. Before the mine expanded, stone had been quarried beneath it for the estate vaults. The tunnel had supposedly been sealed after the quarry flooded. Vane had maintained it in secret. Why hide 2 emergency routes? Edmund asked. Vane's answer came softly. Because if the inspectors knew number 2 depended on abandoned passages for air, they would have closed the gallery. And the quarterly target would have been missed, Martha said. Vane looked at her with open hatred now. Misproduction means missed debt payments. Missed debt payments mean the bank takes the estate. Every family here loses wages, cottages, and food. I kept this place alive. You kept the coal moving, Martha replied. That is not the same thing. His goal was simple. Vane had hidden the failing ventilation because keeping number 2 open protected production. His position and the estate's debt payments, even if 40 men paid the cost underground. Edmund faced the workers in the yard. His voice faltered once before he forced it steady. Superintendent Vane concealed reports, altered drainage, and removed emergency passages from the official maps. I allowed him to act in my name because I was too afraid to enter the work my family owned. Vane stepped toward him. Do not confess to men who need you strong. They need me honest. Edmund looked toward the kitchen floor, where the bellows kept pushing air to the trapped miners. If those 40 men die, the fault will not be buried with them. It will remain here, and it will carry my name beside yours. For the first time, the workers stopped lowering their eyes. The rescue captain divided the crews. One group would continue clearing the service cut from the kitchen. A second would open the old burial tunnel beneath the chapel and attack the collapse from the opposite side. Martha checked both routes against the shift book, lamp records, and drainage timings. The two crews would meet near the block junction if the maps were true. If the maps were false, they would dig into unstable ground from both directions. As men gathered tools, Martha returned to the chimney and struck once. The answer came weakly. One knock. Then nothing. She waited and struck again. No reply. The flour strip near the flue, which had pulled steadily inward all day, sagged against the stone. The buried passage had stopped breathing. The silence in the chimney frightened the kitchen more than any collapse had. Martha held the iron poker against the stone and struck again. One blow. Then 3. Repeat. No answer came. She climbed onto the hearth ledge and pressed the flour cloth to the flue. It hung limp. The air route between the trapped miners and the kitchen had closed somewhere beneath them. Bellows faster, she ordered. The crews bent to the handles. Leather groaned. Iron joints rattled. Fresh air forced downward through the hatch, but nothing returned through the chimney. The rescue captain shook his head. If the draft is gone, the fall has sealed the ventilation drift. Or water has reached the lower bend, Martha said. Either one can kill them before we break through. Edmund looked toward the chapel hill. Then both crews go now. Martha studied the maps one last time. The route from the kitchen was shorter, but already flooding. The burial tunnel was higher and drier. Yet no one knew whether its sealed entrance could be opened without bringing the chapel floor down. 6 through the kitchen cut, she said. 8 at the chapel. No flame. Safety lamps only. Every man tied to a return line. The captain nodded. And nobody strikes iron against stone unless the gas reads clean. Men lifted picks, timber, rope, and covered lamps. Their faces carried the same knowledge Martha felt in her bones. A rescue could become a second disaster before anyone above understood what had happened. Edmund moved to join the chapel crew. Martha caught his sleeve. You own the mine. That does not make you useful underground. His eyes hardened. My cousin is there. So are 39 men whose families expect you to make decisions, not prove courage. I have left difficult decisions to other men long enough. Then stay where every report reaches you. For a moment, he looked ready to overrule her. Instead, he removed his coat, rolled his sleeves, and took a place beside the bellows. The kitchen crew disappeared beneath the hatch. Their safety light became a trembling glow, then vanished around the first bend. Across the estate, workers raised the chapel flagstones and found a bricked arch below the old burial vault. Vane's hidden maintenance had preserved the tunnel, but he had sealed its outer wall with mortar thick enough to slow them. The two rescue teams began from opposite sides. Martha stood between maps, ropes, clocks, and 40 names. Every 15 minutes, the kitchen line tugged once to report safe progress. A mounted runner carried signals from the chapel crew. Martha marked each advance in charcoal. 20 yards. Then 30. The kitchen crew reached the point where water had broken through earlier. Timber braces held, but mud climbed to their knees. They crawled forward, passing loose stone hand to hand. The chapel crew cleared the sealed arch and entered a tunnel lined with rough quarry rock. The air there was stale but breathable. Their first runner reported old footprints preserved in dried silt. Vane had used the passage recently. Martha went to the office where he remained under guard. He sat behind Edmund's desk as though he still commanded the estate. "How long is the burial tunnel?" she asked. Vane did not look up. "The map should tell you." "The map you erased?" A faint smile touched his mouth. "Then perhaps you should have learned more than columns and sums before taking charge of men's lives." Martha placed a shift book before him. 40 men are still written here. That will not keep them alive. No, but you know what lies between the burial tunnel and number 2. His expression remained controlled. Martha leaned closer. The kitchen crew found a reinforced wall not shown on the old plan. The chapel crew found rails. You moved equipment through that tunnel. Vane looked toward the window. "What equipment?" she asked. "Nothing that matters now. If it blocks the rescue, it matters." He stayed silent. Martha understood that fear alone would not move him. Vane had spent years turning danger into arithmetic. She opened the ledger to the deferred ventilation order. "You believe the estate would fail if number 2 closed." "It would have." "You believe 40 wages depended on keeping the seam open." "Hundreds of wages. And now 40 men may die because you protected the rest." Vane finally looked at her. "Do not pretend you would have chosen differently once the bank notices came." Ashcombe could barely face his own office. Someone had to keep the estate working. You could have reduced the shifts and missed production. You could have opened the emergency passages officially and invited inspectors. You could have told the truth. The truth does not pay debt. Martha's voice stayed level. "Then pay it now." She pushed the 40-name roster across the desk. Vane's gaze dropped despite himself. One name stopped him. Thomas Vane. Martha had noticed the surname, but assumed no relation. "Your brother?" she asked. "Half-brother. He is underground. I know where he works." "Then tell me what you stored in the burial tunnel." Vane's fingers tightened over the chair arm. Outside, the chapel bell rang twice, the signal for trouble. Martha turned toward the door. Behind her, Vane spoke. "Powder." She faced him again. "Blasting powder?" 12 crates, kept dry above the drainage line. "Where?" "At the eastern rise, just before the old ventilation junction." The rescue crews were digging toward it from both directions. One spark could turn the buried passage into a furnace. Martha ran. She reached the kitchen yard as Edmund came from the bellows. "What happened?" "Powder in the tunnel. Send word to both crews. No picks beyond the eastern rise." A rider carried the warning toward the chapel. Martha dropped to the hatch and shouted down the service cut, but distance swallowed her voice. She seized the guide rope and gave the emergency pattern. 3 hard pulls. Then 3 again. The line remained still. The crew might already have passed the point where it could move freely. The rescue captain arrived at the hatch. "I am going after them." Martha handed him a wooden mallet and copper wedge from the kitchen's old boiler tools. "No steel." He entered alone. Minutes passed. The guide rope jerked violently. Once. Then stopped. Martha listened at the hatch. A dull impact rolled up the passage. The floor shifted beneath her knees. Dust poured from the ovens. Someone in the yard cried that the tunnel had gone. Then the rope moved. 3 pulls. Emergency. Workers hauled until the rescue captain emerged with 2 injured men. One had a burned sleeve, though no flame had caught. The other bled from the mouth. "We struck a powder crate behind the wall," the captain said. "Didn't ignite. Roof dropped ahead of us. 2 men still inside." Edmund moved toward the hatch. Martha blocked him. "Rope team first. They may be dying. And if you climb over the men trained to bring them out, you delay them." 4 workers entered. They returned with the missing rescuers, both conscious but badly bruised. The kitchen route was closed. Only the burial tunnel remained. A runner came hard from the chapel, his horse lathered. "The crew found the powder," he said. "They can move the crates, but the tunnel narrows beyond them. Air is foul. One lamp nearly died." "How far from the miners?" Martha asked. "Less than 40 feet, they think. Hammering is stronger." She checked the time. The buried men had gone hours without steady ventilation. Even if every one of them remained alive, weakness would make the crawl out slow. Martha ordered the kitchen bellows dismantled. Men carried the leather chambers, stovepipes, and copper joints uphill to the chapel. They fitted the pieces into the burial tunnel and began forcing air toward the miners from the higher route. Martha took the shift book with her. At the eastern rise, the rescue crew had dragged the powder crates into an empty vault and packed wet blankets around them. Beyond that point, the tunnel pinched beneath a bowed timber roof. The miners' hammering came faintly through the wall. Martha knelt beside the safety lamp. Its flame was small but steady. "Use hands and wooden wedges near the final fall," she said. "No hard blows." The men worked in pairs. One loosened stone. One passed it backward. Every 10 minutes, fresh workers replaced them. Edmund stood at the mouth of the tunnel, reading names from Martha's book as each team entered. Not as an owner counting labor, but as a man making certain no rescuer vanished without being remembered. The opening widened inch by inch. A voice came through the stones. "Air!" The rescuers froze. Martha dropped to the gap. "This is Martha Quinn. Can you hear me?" A rough answer came. "Yes." "How many men answer roll?" A long pause followed. Then the voice returned. 38 speak. 2 won't wake." No one above the tunnel moved. Martha forced her own fear aside. "Are they breathing?" "Yes. Weak. Keep them flat. Do not lift them until we reach you." The rescue captain examined the remaining fall. "We can make a crawl hole in an hour." "They may not have an hour," Edmund said. "We rush. We bring the roof down." The men continued. At last a gap opened wide enough for a safety lamp. Clean air from the bellows entered the trapped chamber, and a miner's blackened hand reached through. The first man crawled out on his elbows. Then another. Martha stood with the roster. She marked each name only after hearing it spoken. 1, 5, 12, 20. The rescued miners emerged slowly, some walking bent beneath the roof, others dragged on canvas slings. Men outside carried them into the chapel where water, blankets, and broth from the abandoned kitchen waited. 32. 36. 38. The final 2 came out unconscious. One was Thomas Vane. The other was Daniel Ashcombe. Edmund dropped beside his cousin, but Martha stopped him from pouring water into the man's mouth. "Wet his lips. Keep him on his side." Daniel coughed once. Then again. Thomas did not move. A former army surgeon from the estate bent over him, listened, and began working air into his lungs with a cloth valve fashioned from the kitchen bellows. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then Thomas Vane drew a ragged breath. Martha looked at the roster. 40 names. 40 men above ground. The rescue captain began to say they had done it, but a deputy rode into the chapel yard before the relief could settle. He carried a county order bearing the mine inspector's seal. Superintendent Vane had sent a messenger before being confined. The order named Martha responsible for unauthorized entry into a condemned passage, destruction of estate records, and endangerment of rescue workers. The deputy looked ashamed. "I am required to take her before the county magistrate." Edmund stepped between them. "She saved 40 men. The complaint says she nearly killed 6 more." Behind the deputy, Vane arrived under guard. His brother lay breathing only yards away, yet Vane's first glance went to the official paper. "You wanted the truth written down," he told Martha. Now it is. 2 days later, the county hearing filled every bench of the courthouse. Vane sat beside the bank's attorney in a dark coat, composed and clean. Martha sat alone at the opposite table until Edmund entered and took the chair beside her. The magistrate began with the county order. The official mine map showed no service cut beneath the kitchen and no burial tunnel beneath the chapel. By that map, Martha had directed men into passages that did not legally exist. The bank's attorney spoke carefully. Miss Quinn may have acted from concern. Concern does not grant authority. She destroyed a ledger page, ignored the superintendent, flooded estate property, and sent rescuers into gas. One burned sleeve and 2 injured men were presented as proof. For a time, the paper looked stronger than 40 living witnesses. The magistrate turned to Edmund. "Did you authorize her actions before the first crew entered?" Edmund hesitated. Everyone saw it. He had given orders in the kitchen, but no written authority had been prepared. If he claimed the decision entirely, the bank could declare him unfit to manage the indebted estate. If he denied it, Martha would stand alone. Vane watched him. "You need not ruin your family name for a clerk," he said softly. Edmund looked toward Daniel, seated on the front bench with his head bandaged. Then he faced the magistrate. "I authorized her because I had failed to authorize safety when it mattered." The attorney objected that grief had impaired his judgment. The magistrate examined the official inspection packet. It contained no warnings, no alternate passages, and no altered drainage order. Martha's copied report was dismissed at first as an unofficial duplicate. The near failure came quietly. The magistrate lifted the county map. "This is the controlling record. Unless someone proves it false." The superintendent acted within the plan filed with my office. Martha searched the courtroom. The workers who had spoken in the kitchen now sat silent beneath Vane's gaze. Harlan lowered his eyes. The older miner who carried timber into the hidden passage stared at his boots. Without witnesses, the books could be called mistakes. Without the missing originals, the map could remain law. The magistrate began to close the evidence. Then the county clerk rose from his desk. He was an elderly man with shaking hands. Vane looked at him once. That was enough to make the clerk sit halfway down again. Daniel Ashcombe reached into his coat and placed his unused supper token on the rail before him. The small metal disc struck the wood. The clerk stared at it. Then he stood fully. "I received another map," he said. Vane's attorney objected. The clerk's voice failed. He swallowed, looked at Vane again, and nearly sat. Martha said nothing. Thomas Vane, still pale from the rescue, rose from the rear bench. "My brother knew the passage was there." Vane turned. "Thomas." The warning in his voice silenced the room. Thomas gripped the bench until his hands steadied. "He sent me twice to inspect the braces. Told me never to mark the route on a shift sheet." The clerk opened a locked drawer beneath his table. From it he removed a folded plan bearing the county receiving stamp. "The superintendent filed this map 6 years ago," he said, then returned the next morning and substituted the other one. The bank's attorney demanded proof that the first map had been received earlier. The clerk pointed to the county seal. The seal on the hidden map was pressed before the stamp pad cracked. He showed the magistrate the fine, unbroken ring around the date. Then he placed the official replacement beside it. Its seal carried a narrow split through the county eagle, a flaw that had appeared months later and remained on every document since. One small crack destroyed the larger lie. The original map showed both emergency passages, the north drain valve, and the ventilation drift serving number 2. Martha's copied warnings matched the locations exactly. Harlan stood. Then the timber worker. Then the pump tender. Their courage did not arrive like a cheer. It came one frightened statement at a time. Vane had ordered the valve reversed. Vane had hidden the timber charges under kitchen accounts. Vane had removed the warning reports. Vane had kept number 2 producing after the air readings fell below safe practice. The magistrate closed the official packet. Silas Vane, you used false county records to conceal conditions that endangered every man in that gallery. Vane looked at Edmund. I saved your estate. Edmund answered before the magistrate could. You saved Cole. The magistrate ordered Vane held for fraud, reckless endangerment, and falsification of mine records. The bank's petition to remove Edmund from control of the estate was denied, pending a full safety reorganization. Then the magistrate turned to Martha. The destruction of an original ledger page remains an offense. The room tightened. Martha stood. Yes, sir. But the page was preserved, produced, and used to locate 40 trapped men. This court will not punish the act that kept evidence from being destroyed by the man who concealed it. He dismissed the complaint. Outside the courthouse, the 40 miners waited together. No speeches were made. Daniel Ashcombe handed Martha the supper token he had never collected. You kept the count, he said. Martha closed her fingers around it. Every name mattered. Behind them, Edmund stood before the workers and repeated publicly what he had said in the kitchen. The superintendent had concealed the danger. The owner had failed to look. And the woman he punished had saved the men he was responsible for protecting. The truth did not restore the broken bridge or clear the collapsed gallery. But before sunset, it had finally been entered into the county record where no one could erase it again. For several weeks after the hearing, Martha still woke before dawn expecting the colliery bell to break into its wild alarm. It never did. The mine remained closed while every gallery, drain, timber brace, and ventilation route was inspected. Men who had once feared losing a day's wage now stood beside surveyors and pointed out cracks, stale air pockets, and shortcuts they had been ordered to ignore. Their testimony was entered into permanent records, and no superintendent could remove a warning without leaving both his name and the owner's beside it. Edmund Ashcombe did not rebuild the broken grain bridge first. He repaired the abandoned kitchen. The floor above the service hatch was reinforced but never covered. The iron plate remained visible beneath a hinged oak frame, and the old ovens were restored beside shelves for rescue lamps, rope, medical cloth, and sealed water tins. A new wall carried updated mine maps drawn large enough for every worker to read. At the center stood Martha's long table. It no longer held cracked pans and discarded accounts. Each morning, shift books were opened there before the men went underground. Air readings were read aloud. Drainage changes required 2 signatures. Any worker could report danger without losing wages or lodging while the report was examined. Edmund offered Martha the title of estate comptroller. She refused it. A grand name will not keep a passage open, she said. He tried again. Then choose your own. Martha looked at the roster board, the safety maps, and the kitchen hatch through which 40 men had received their first breath of clean air. Records and rescue, she said. I will answer for both. So the estate created the Office of Mine Records and Rescue, though most workers simply called it Martha's Kitchen. The 40 miners returned one by one after the gallery was declared safe. Some carried scars. 6 moved more slowly than before. Thomas Vane never regained full strength in his left hand, but he came each morning to inspect the ventilation doors his brother had once hidden from county officials. Daniel Ashcombe returned to the mine only after Edmund placed written authority in the hands of the safety committee. No production order could overrule them. No debt notice could force men into a condemned seam. Yet freedom from danger did not mean freedom from fear. Whenever the colliery bell rang for an ordinary shift change, Thomas froze. His fingers closed around the nearest solid object, and his breathing became shallow. Other rescued miners glanced toward the ground as though stone might begin moving beneath their boots. For months, no man entered number 2 without first looking back toward the kitchen chimney. Martha never told them to forget. She kept the doors open and the kettle warm. A miner who could not face the cage sat at the long table until his hands stopped shaking. A man troubled by underground darkness took the first inspection shift with 2 companions instead of 1. Those who woke hearing imagined knocks could come to the kitchen at any hour and find a lamp burning behind thick glass. Care became part of the operating cost. Edmund signed every expense. The county eventually convicted Silas Vane of falsifying records and deliberately concealing dangerous conditions. Before he was taken away, Thomas visited him once. No one asked what passed between the brothers. Thomas returned to the estate carrying neither forgiveness nor hatred loudly enough for others to see. He only asked Martha to place his name on the ventilation committee. She did. The estate's debts did not disappear. Production remained lower while tunnels were rebuilt, and the lost bridge cost them an entire season of easy railway access. Edmund sold a portion of his private hunting land rather than cut wages or reopen unsafe galleries. Some neighboring owners called him weak. He began attending every underground inspection. The first time he entered number 2, Daniel walked beside him. Edmund stopped where the collapse had trapped the 40 men and rested one hand against the new timber support. "My brother died because I let another man decide when hope was finished," he said. Daniel answered quietly, "Then do not surrender the deciding again." Edmund did not. Martha's place at the estate changed more slowly. Workers trusted her judgment, yet she continued sleeping in the narrow room beside the abandoned kitchen. She kept her belongings packed in one wooden case as though Vane might return, lock the door, and order her gone before breakfast. Edmund noticed but did not ask her to stay. Instead, he had the lock removed from the outside of the kitchen door. He placed the old iron bolt on her desk beside Daniel's supper token. Martha stared at both pieces of metal for a long time. "One kept me in," she said. "The other reminded you who was still below," Edmund replied. She touched the token. There were 40 reminders. He nodded toward the open doorway. "Then let the door remain for all 40. Years passed, and the abandoned kitchen became the model for rescue rooms at 3 other collieries. Copies of Martha's rotation charts, map registers, and paired signature rules traveled farther than she ever did. Mine owners who once dismissed a bookkeeper's methods began keeping food stores, first aid supplies, ventilation plans, and accurate shift rosters in rooms above their emergency routes. Martha trained clerks to understand that a figure on a page could be a lamp, a meal, a timber brace, or a living man. "Never write a number you cannot defend," she told them. "And never erase one, because it makes a powerful person uncomfortable." Edmund grew gray at the temples. Martha's thin frame remained familiar behind the long table, though her hands became marked by ink and years. They never needed a grand declaration to explain what stood between them. He brought her the first safety report each morning. She kept a chair for him beside the maps. On the 10th anniversary of the collapse, all 40 rescued miners returned to the estate. Some no longer worked below ground. Some had become inspectors, deputies, pump tenders, and rescue captains. Thomas Vane arrived carrying the original cracked county map, released from evidence after the final appeals ended. They hung it on the kitchen wall beneath a simple brass plate. 40 men below. 40 men returned. No warning erased again. That evening, Daniel placed the old supper token in a frame beside the plate. The kitchen door stood open while rain crossed the yard. Once, that door had shaken against an iron bolt while 40 men fought for breath beneath the estate. Now miners entered through it freely, bringing reports before danger became disaster and names before numbers could become graves. Martha listened as the shift bell rang. Thomas stiffened for only a moment. Then the 40 men remained seated around the table, and the sound passed without taking anyone from them. If this story reminded you that truth written down can still save lives, write "every name mattered" in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary women who stood firm when powerful men tried to bury the truth.